Had George Patton failed to move when he did, the 101st Airborne Division would not have been captured, marched away, and recorded as prisoners of war. They would have ceased to exist, not defeated, not forced to surrender, erased. In the frozen darkness of December 1944, the Screaming Eagles were surrounded in a small Belgian town most Americans could barely pronounce, much less locate on a map, Bastogne. They were desperately short of ammunition, almost out of medical supplies, and rapidly running out of time. German armor pressed inward from every direction. Adolf Hitler himself had ordered their annihilation, not their capture. The weather was merciless. Allied aircraft sat grounded on icy runways, useless. No airdrops, no fighter-bomber support, no relief from the sky. Every rational assessment reached the same conclusion. No force could reach Bastogne in time. Every calculation ended the same way. The 101st Airborne Division was doomed. Everyone accepted that reality. Everyone except one man. This was a moment when Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Western Europe, realized that George S. Patton might be the only general capable of executing the maneuver needed to save the most fragile point of the Allied front. It is the story of what Eisenhower said when Patton actually did it. A story of impossible odds, desperate men huddled in snow-filled foxholes, and a single phone call that carried 10,000 lives in just 4 short words. The clock began ticking on December 19th, 1944. Inside the Situation Room at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. The air felt as heavy as the winter sky outside. Maps covered the walls and tables. What had once been neat lines and orderly colored pins had become a nightmare of jagged arrows and sudden gaps. Days earlier, German forces had smashed into the Ardennes forest, carving a deep, irregular bulge into the American front. Entire units had been pushed back, overrun, or had simply disappeared amid the chaos. But now, one place dominated every conversation. Bastogne, a crossroads town that had been little more than a backwater days before had become the focal point of the entire crisis. Intelligence officers delivered their briefings in low, precise voices. The 101st Airborne Division, along with fragments of armor and infantry from other units, was completely encircled in and around the town. Nearly 10,000 American soldiers surrounded by German forces that outnumbered them several times over. Artillery ammunition was critically limited. Rifle rounds were being rationed. Medical supplies were nearly gone. Wounded men lay in freezing basements and barns without bandages, without morphine, without heat. German attacks were growing more intense by the hour, and hanging over every report was the same brutal reality. The weather has grounded Allied aircraft. Eisenhower stood before the map, his face etched with exhaustion. Since the offensive began, he had slept little. The officers briefing him could see how heavily each report weighed on him. He listened in silence, hands folded, eyes fixed on the bulge clawing westward from the German border. When the summary of Bastogne's situation ended, Eisenhower asked the only question that mattered. How long can they hold? The intelligence officer hesitated. He understood that his answer was more than information. It was a sentence. Sir, he said finally, realistically for 5 days. Maybe a week if everything goes their way. After that, they'll be out of ammunition, out of supplies, and the Germans will overwhelm them. Eisenhower's jaw tightened. The loss of an entire airborne division would be catastrophic by any measure. Militarily, it would eliminate a critical elite formation. Logistically, it would destabilize the defense of the entire sector. Psychologically, it would be devastating. These were not anonymous troops. These were the men who had jumped into Normandy on D-Day, who had fought through the hedgerows of France and the streets of Dutch towns during Operation Market Garden. They had become living symbols of American resolve. Their destruction would echo far beyond the frozen forests of Belgium. What options do we have to relieve them? Eisenhower demanded. The answers were grim. British forces under Bernard Montgomery were holding the northern shoulder of the German advance, but they were not positioned to drive south quickly. Other American armies were locked in desperate defensive battles, struggling simply to hold their own lines. No one had the troops, the fuel, or the positioning to launch a major counterattack toward Bastogne within the shrinking window allowed by the 101st's remaining ammunition. No one, except Third Army. Far to the south, Patton's forces were engaged in operations in the Saar region. To reach Bastogne, the entire army would have to disengage from its current fronts, pivot 90 degrees north, and drive through winter storms directly into advancing German formations. That left only one name: Patton. For years, Eisenhower had weighed Patton's undeniable brilliance against his volatility. The same man capable of envisioning and executing audacious maneuvers could ignite political disaster with a single reckless remark. Eisenhower had reprimanded him, defended him, shielded him, and more than once had seriously considered relieving him of command. Commanding George Patton was like trying to harness lightning. It was exhausting, but as Eisenhower stared at the map, its grim black lines encircling Bastogne, he understood that this was not a moment for caution or convenience. He did not need a polite, manageable general. He needed lightning. "Get me Patton," Eisenhower ordered. "Tell him I want him in Verdun tomorrow for an emergency conference, and tell him to bring plans for offensive operations." He paused, then added quietly, "He'll know what that means." After his staff hurried out, Eisenhower remained alone for a moment in the dimly lit Situation Room. His aide, Harry Butcher, later recorded that he heard Eisenhower murmur under his breath, not as a distant Supreme Commander, but as a man appealing to a dangerous ally. "George, for once in this damned war, do exactly what I need you to do. Those paratroopers are counting on you. America is counting on you. I am counting on you. Don't let me down." The following day, December 19th, the meeting at Verdun would pass into legend. Historians would later focus on the moment when Patton stunned the room with a promise that seemed impossible. What is often overlooked is Eisenhower's response, what he said, and how much truly hung in the balance. Headquarters at Verdun buzzed with officers, couriers, and staff, but inside the main conference room the atmosphere was taut, almost brittle. Around the table sat the men responsible for the Western Front, generals commanding hundreds of thousands of soldiers who had driven the Allied armies from Normandy to the edge of Germany. Eisenhower opened not with maps, but with psychology. He told them the situation must be viewed as an opportunity, not a disaster. It was a necessary show of confidence. Everyone in the room understood they were facing the gravest crisis since the morning of June 6, 1944. He then laid out the central problem. The German offensive had torn a deep bulge into the Allied line, but in doing so it had exposed its own flanks. If the Allies could move quickly, the bulge could be cut off and destroyed. Bastogne, sitting at the center of the road network, was the key. If it fell, German forces could drive deeper and split the Allied front. If it held, the German advance could become a trap. "I want each of you," Eisenhower said, "to think carefully before you answer. How soon can you launch an offensive to relieve Bastogne?" Around the table, commanders began running the same calculations in their heads: available divisions, road capacity, fuel reserves, ammunition stocks, the time required to disengage units and redeploy them in winter conditions. The honest answer was measured in days, perhaps weeks. No one wanted to promise what could not be delivered. Then George Patton spoke. "I can attack on the 22nd, he said, with 3 divisions. The room went silent. Eyes turned toward him. Some assumed it was a bluff. Another Patton flourish. To disengage troops already in contact, pivot an entire army 90 degrees, and drive nearly 100 miles through snow and ice to strike the flank of the German offensive in 3 days was, by any conventional standard, fantasy. Eisenhower did not smile. He fixed his gaze on Patton and spoke deliberately, each word heavy with consequence. "George, I am not asking for optimism. I am not asking what might be theoretically possible on a map. I am asking what you can actually accomplish. The lives of 10,000 American soldiers depend on your answer. The men of the 101st Airborne are surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of everything. If you say you will be there and you are not, they die. All of them." He paused and asked again, "Can you attack on December 22nd? Patton did not retreat. "Ike," he replied, "I already have 3 plans. My staff anticipated this possibility. We've war-gamed 3 separate contingencies for turning north. On the 22nd, my 4th Armored Division will be attacking toward Bastogne. That is not a guess. It is not a hope. It is a fact." Eisenhower searched Patton's face for bravado, for exaggeration. Instead, he saw something rare in him, complete hard-edged certainty. Against all odds, the mercurial general had prepared for exactly this moment. "Very well, George," Eisenhower said at last. "You have your mission. Relieve Bastogne. You have full operational freedom to execute it as you see fit." Then his tone changed, and the room felt it. "But understand this. If you fail, if those paratroopers die because you did not deliver what you promised, I will personally see that you never command troops again. Not relieved from 3rd Army. Finished. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Patton replied. "I will not fail." Later, Eisenhower pulled his chief of staff, Walter Bedell Smith, aside. Smith's notes preserved the moment. "The boss asked me if I thought George could really do it," Smith wrote. "I told him it sounded impossible." Ike said. Smith continued, "That is why I am sending Patton. Impossible is what he does." What followed from December 20th through December 26th appears on paper as a series of movements and engagements. In reality, it was a race against a merciless clock. Patton's staff worked frantically, issuing orders, rerouting traffic, rebuilding supply lines, turning entire divisions around on snow-choked roads. Eisenhower watched Bastogne from afar, living hour to hour on fragments of news. The reports were grim. Artillery pounding American positions day and night. German infantry pressing closer, supported by tanks. Ammunition dwindling with every fire mission. Medical officers begging for dressings, morphine, blankets. Then came another report. The acting commander of the 101st Airborne, General Anthony McAuliffe, had received a written demand from German forces to surrender or face annihilation. He scribbled a 1-word reply that would become famous. "Nuts." When Eisenhower read it, a weary smile crossed his face. "At least their spirit isn't broken," he told his staff. But spirit alone could not stop shells or bullets. Patton had to get there. On December 22nd, exactly as promised, elements of 3rd Army began their attack northward. Patton's forces ran into everything winter and the Wehrmacht could throw at them. Ice-slick roads, blown bridges, ambushes, dug-in anti-tank guns, and relentless German rear guards. The advance was slower than anyone had hoped. At Bastogne, the situation tightened even further. Soldiers were down to a handful of rounds per rifle. Some artillery batteries had so little ammunition that every shot had to be measured as if it were made of gold. Wounded men lay 2 or 3 to a stretcher, or on the floor, or directly on the frozen earth. Frostbitten faces stared out into the blowing snow, knowing that beyond the white curtain, more German troops were assembling for yet another assault. Eisenhower sent a message to McAuliffe. "Hold at all costs. Relief is on the way." Yet in his private notes, he admitted the terrible truth. He had gambled everything on Patton. If 3rd Army did not break through, Bastogne would fall, and in his mind, the responsibility for the disaster would rest squarely on the man who had authorized the attempt. On December 23rd, the sky over Bastogne finally cleared enough for transport aircraft to fly. See, 47 planes roared in at low altitude, dropping bundles of ammunition, medical supplies, and food. Paratroopers watched the parachutes bloom above them like salvation in slow motion. It bought precious time, but not much. German commanders, enraged at the stubborn American resistance, prepared yet more attacks. Adolf Hitler had ordered Bastogne taken at any cost. To him, the town was not merely a tactical objective. It was a symbol. Crushing the elite American paratroopers there would prove that Germany could still strike fear into Allied hearts. Eisenhower sent urgent messages to Patton. George, I need maximum effort. The 101st cannot hold much longer. Whatever you are doing, do it faster. On paper, these were just ink words. In reality, they carried the weight of thousands of shivering, hungry, exhausted men. By Christmas Eve, December 24th, Eisenhower looked years older than he had a week before. He attended a chapel service, trying for a few minutes to close his eyes and listen to word of peace, while knowing that men under his command were fighting and dying in the snow. Between hymns, he kept glancing toward the door, waiting for updates. Reports from Patton's spearheads were cautiously optimistic, but still short of a breakthrough. They were fighting closer now, but Bastogne remained encircled. That night, Eisenhower sat at his desk, drafting letters he prayed he would never have to send. Conditional letters, prepared in case of the worst. Letters to the families of men in the 101st, to chaplains, to staff officers who had sons in the division. One aide later remembered finding him surrounded by half-finished condolences. Eisenhower looked up and said, I hope to God I do not have to sign these. Christmas Day came and went. December 25th, 1944, should have been a day of carols and candlelight. For Eisenhower, it was a day of gnawing anxiety. He checked messages during the church service, afterward and well into the night. Still no definitive word. Third Army was closing in. The 101st was still holding, still surrounded. The margin for error had shrunk to almost nothing. December 26 arrived. In the late afternoon, 10 minutes before 5, the telephone on Eisenhower's desk rang. His aide answered, listened, then turned to the commander with an expression that froze everyone in the room. Sir, he said, it's General Patton. He says it's urgent. Eisenhower snatched up the receiver. Ike, we are through. Patton's voice came over the line, carrying the crackle of distance and relief. 4th Armored made contact with the 101st at 1,650 hours. The corridor is narrow but open. We're pushing supplies and reinforcements through now. Bastogne is relieved. For a heartbeat, or maybe two, Eisenhower said nothing. Witnesses saw his shoulders sag, as if a physical weight had lifted. His hand tightened around the phone, knuckles whitening. George, he said at last, voice unsteady. Say that again. We are through to Bastogne, Patton repeated. The screaming eagles are safe. They are beaten up, but they held. We got there in time. Eisenhower's response was thick with emotion. George, I thank God. Thank you. You did it. You saved them. Patton, ever uncomfortable with overt sentiment, deflected. Just doing my job. Ike, those paratroopers did the real work. We just opened the door. Eisenhower would not let him diminish it. No, George, do not underplay this. You turned an entire army in a blizzard and broke through in 4 days. That is not just doing your job. That is why you are indispensable. Difficult as hell, but indispensable. After the call ended, Eisenhower remained standing, staring at the map where a thin line now connected 3rd Army to Bastogne. Witnesses later recalled his eyes were wet, and he did not bother to hide it. Gentlemen, he said to his staff, General Patton has just accomplished something I will remember as long as I live. He saved 10,000 American soldiers who were hours, perhaps minutes, from annihilation. He did what I asked him to do when I asked him to do it, against odds everyone said were impossible. George S. Patton is the most difficult subordinate I have ever had. He is also, beyond question, one of the finest battlefield commanders this country has produced. Messages flew out. Official congratulations to the 101st Airborne for their stubborn, almost superhuman defense. Commendations to 3rd Army for the rapid and decisive relief operation. Reports to the War Department that Bastogne had held and the German offensive was blunted. But Eisenhower also sat down to write something more personal, a telegram directly to Patton. George, he wrote, Words cannot adequately express my gratitude and admiration for what Third Army has accomplished. You gave your word that you would be there. You kept that word. In doing so, you saved not only 10,000 soldiers, but potentially the entire Ardennes campaign. Well done does not begin to cover it. This operation will be studied for generations as an example of operational genius. I am proud to have you under my command. Ike! Later that evening, Eisenhower's aide found him alone again, staring at the same map. The line to Bastogne was now secure, reinforced, widened. Eisenhower traced it with a finger and murmured almost to himself, "For more hours." That was all it had taken. 4 hours between salvation and annihilation. In the days that followed, Eisenhower's private assessment of Patton combined relief with a sober, almost clinical appreciation. To General George Marshall, the Army Chief of Staff in Washington, he wrote plainly, "George Patton has just saved my command." Had Bastogne fallen with an entire airborne division destroyed, the psychological impact would have been catastrophic. Questions would have been raised about our strategy, our competence, and my leadership. Patton prevented that disaster. Whatever difficulties I've had with him, and there are many, this operation alone justifies every painful decision I have made to keep him in command. To Bernard Montgomery, coordinating operations on the northern flank, Eisenhower sent a pointed diplomatic message. Patton's relief of Bastogne is a clear demonstration of American operational capability. I know there have been questions about our effectiveness. Bastogne should lay them to rest. The words were formal, but the subtext was unmistakable. American forces had not only held, they had executed one of the most demanding maneuvers of the war and succeeded. In his diary, Eisenhower was even more candid. He admitted that he had spent years wrestling with Patton's ego, his outbursts, and his controversial statements. There had been times when he wanted to relieve him, times when he doubted whether the constant supervision and political complications were worth it. Bastogne answered that question. Patton was worth every frustration, every angry conversation. When it mattered most, when 10,000 men were on the brink, George delivered. Not eventually, not late, exactly when and how he said he would. That, Eisenhower wrote, is the mark of a great commander. Patton received another note from Eisenhower on January 2nd, 1945, after the immediate crisis had passed and the broader offensive was shifting. George, the letter read, "I have had time to reflect. What you accomplished goes beyond tactical brilliance. You gave hope to men who had every reason to believe they were abandoned. You proved that American forces could execute complex, high-speed operations under the worst possible conditions. You changed German perceptions of what we are capable of. Most importantly, you saved lives, not in theory, but in concrete reality. Every man of the 101st who returned to his family owes a part of that to your speed and aggression. That is a legacy greater than any medal." Years later, in his memoir Crusade in Europe, Eisenhower devoted a full account to Bastogne. He described the relief of the town by Patton's forces as one of the pivotal moments of the Western campaign, highlighting the extraordinary speed with which Third Army disengaged, pivoted, and attacked north. Movements often taught as theoretical exercises in staff colleges had become reality at Bastogne. In a mid-1960s interview, when asked to name the most agonizing command decision of the war, Eisenhower did not mention D-Day, nor the choice of landing beaches, nor the appointment of commanders. He said, "Trusting George Patton to relieve Bastogne, it was a gamble of the highest order. I was wagering the lives of 10,000 paratroopers, the stability of our entire position, on a man who had often been difficult to control. But I also knew he was the only one who could do it in the time we had. When that phone call came, 'We are through to Bastogne,' I felt a relief and gratitude I still cannot fully describe. Those 4 words may have been the most important 4 I heard during the entire war." In his final reflections, Eisenhower summed up the paradox of Patton. Many generals will be remembered for careful planning, political skill, or steady competence. Few would be remembered for saving an entire division from destruction through sheer operational daring. That, he wrote, was Patton at Bastogne, difficult, flawed, controversial, but the man who refused to accept that 10,000 Americans were doomed. He gave his word that he would reach them, and he did. The relief of Bastogne was more than a military maneuver on a winter map. It was a moment when a commander's faith in a difficult genius paid off, when a wild talent proved that sometimes the most troublesome people are the ones who achieve the miracles others consider impossible. It was the intersection of stubborn courage in the foxholes and audacious decision-making in the command posts. Every action, every moment, balanced on the edge of a phone line, and a clock ticking down to zero. If the story of impossible odds, desperate choices, and the words that define legends resonates with you, stay with us. We are here to reveal the hidden moments, the private conversations, and the human drama behind history's greatest battles. Hit subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss the next episode. Leave a comment sharing what leadership under pressure means to you, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that refusing to accept defeat can change everything. And remember, help us grow. Your super chats and super stickers directly support the channel and future content.